Crafted over 2.5 months of meticulous production, this journey plunges you into the heart of World War II. Experience the sweeping narrative of the conflict from the distinct perspectives of Germany, Japan, China, and the United States, offering a detailed, drama-like understanding of the war's intricate progression through the eyes of different nations. How did Nazi Germany, having swept across much of Europe, ultimately succumb to defeat? Following its defeat in World War I on November 11, 1918, Germany faced a punitive peace. The Allied powers, notably Britain and France, were determined to cripple Germany and prevent its resurgence. They compelled the nation to sign the Treaty of Versailles, an unequal accord that stripped Germany of 1/5 of its territory, all its overseas colonies, and imposed a staggering 150 billion German marks in war reparations. This harsh settlement ignited a firestorm of public protest and deep-seated resentment across the German populace. In a desperate bid to salvage the economy, President Hindenburg resorted to a stopgap measure, the continuous printing of banknotes, to ease domestic unrest. This tactic, however, swiftly backfired. The rampant over-issuance of currency triggered an unprecedented hyperinflation of the German mark. By 1922, mere 900 German marks could procure only a single US dollar, and at its nadir, a loaf of bread fetched an astronomical 500,000 marks, a sum so vast it literally wouldn't fit in a cart. Germany's economy lay in utter ruin. Amidst this economic wreckage, a figure named Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party rose to prominence. In his nascent political career, Hitler became a familiar presence in German beer halls, delivering fiery speeches that meticulously dissected Germany's profound economic and political woes. To the despairing masses, he declared, "Since you have no other choice, join my party." He frequently pledged that every German citizen would own a car, that the days of 500,000 mark bread would be relegated to history, and that he would ultimately shred the humiliating Treaty of Versailles. His fervent rhetoric resonated deeply, and support for the Nazi party surged day by day. By 1932, the Nazis had ascended to become Germany's largest political party, and Hitler, securing an impressive 3 million votes, was appointed Chancellor. Driven by an ambition for swift national development, Hitler aggressively championed heavy industry and military rearmament. Yet, the shackles of the Treaty of Versailles, enforced by Britain and France, severely curtailed Germany's military might. Its army was capped at 100,000 men, its navy drastically restricted, and any form of air force, including naval aviation and military aircraft, outright forbidden. At this impasse, an unexpected lifeline emerged from the United States. Concerned that British and French dominance in Europe might undermine its own global standing, the US extended a substantial $160 billion in loans to Germany, intending to foster a counterbalance. Bolstered by this formidable American aid, Germany embarked on a clandestine military expansion. Before openly asserting its strength, Nazi Germany under Hitler masterfully crafted various pretexts to mask its burgeoning military development. Under the guise of manufacturing civilian aircraft and tractors, thousands of planes, tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery pieces were secretly churned out. To circumvent the ban on Air Force, aviation clubs were openly established. When the army was restricted to 100, Hitler ingeniously swelled the ranks of the German police to 800,000. These seemingly illogical maneuvers deftly sidestepped the Versailles restrictions, propelling Germany's military strength to rapid growth. Hitler was convinced that only through formidable military power could Germany shamanise the oppressive chains imposed by Britain and France. Consequently, he spared no expense, funneling the nation's entire resources into military-industrial development. Military expenditure skyrocketed. By 1938, Germany had swelled to 1 million personnel, and military spending assumed a staggering 50% of the national economy, an unparalleled proportion globally. At this juncture, Hitler's ambition for foreign expansion became irrepressible. March 1938 saw Hitler annex oil-rich Austria without a single shot fired. Astonishingly, Britain and France turned a blind eye to this blatant aggression, a move that only fueled Hitler's arrogance. With Austria's considerable oil reserves, Nazi Germany's national strength surged further. On March 15, he brazenly seized Czechoslovakia. This act finally roused Britain and France, who issued a stern warning: continued German aggression against European nations would result in a declaration of war. Yet Hitler, utterly consumed by irrationality, dismissed their threats, convinced that Britain and France were too timid to engage Germany in direct conflict. Shortly thereafter, his gaze fixed on Poland as the next target for invasion. On August 23, 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union inked the Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact. This agreement between two non-contiguous nations delineated their shared border through Polish territory, an unambiguous blueprint for partitioning Poland. The stage was now set for the imminent eruption of war. In the pre-dawn hours of September 1, 1939, Germany unleashed a surprise attack on Poland. A massive force of 1.5 million troops, arrayed across 3 fronts, ignited World War II. Employing its devastating blitzkrieg lightning war tactics, Germany advanced with relentless speed and power. General Guderian's 19th Panzer Division spearheaded the charge, an unstoppable juggernaut across the battlefield. On September 3, Britain and France formally declared war on Germany. Yet this declaration was unaccompanied by military aid to Poland. They passively observed as Germany consumed the nation, policy infamously dubbed appeasement. Under the ferocious German offensive, Poland sustained grievous losses and steadily receded. On September 17, the Soviet Union joined the fray, invading Poland from the east. Trapped between the combined onslaught of Germany and the Soviet Union, Poland's fate was irrevocably sealed. By October 6, 1999, Poland succumbed to a mere 35 days of resistance, its territory completely subjugated by the 2 invading powers. On November 26, 1939, the Soviet Union unexpectedly massed 1 million troops along the Finnish border and unleashed a massive assault on Finland. What many anticipate as an overwhelming Soviet victory, however, utterly defied expectations. Finland refused to buckle under the mighty Soviet invasion. The Finnish army adopted ingenious defensive strategies, leveraging the brutal winter, frozen swamps, and dense forests to their advantage. Employing fierce guerrilla tactics that inflicted crippling losses on the Soviet forces. Though the war spanned only 3 months, the Soviet Union suffered a staggering 400,000 casualties, with 22 divisions decimated. In the aftermath, the Soviets only managed to annex 1/10 of Finland's territory. The Soviet Union had won the war, but at a severe cost to its prestige. This embarrassing performance exposed the perceived weakness of Soviet military power to Hitler, with the Winter War inadvertently laying the crucial groundwork for Germany's subsequent invasion of the Soviet Union. April 1940 saw Hitler pivot his gaze towards Northern Europe, driven by the insatiable need for more war resources. On April 9, German forces launched a lightning strike against Denmark. Given Denmark's modest national power, German troops required a mere 4 hours to completely subdue the country. Following this swift conquest, German forces invaded Norway. As a coastal nation, Norway necessitated a combined arms approach, with Germany primarily deploying naval and air forces alongside amphibious landings for a full-scale offensive. The nocturnal timing of the German invasion caught Norwegian forces completely off guard, preventing any timely defense. Within a mere 12 hours, the Norwegian capital fell into German hands. Even the subsequent arrival of British and French reinforcements proved futile. Norway capitulated to Germany after just 60 days of fighting. In swift succession, Nazi Germany, then over, and Luxembourg in a single day, the Netherlands in 5, and Belgium in 18. Having subjugated these nations, Hitler next fixed his sights on France. At the time, France possessed Europe's most formidable army, boasting 3 million soldiers, and was protected by the supposedly impregnable Maginot Line along its German border. A direct frontal assault on the French forces offered no strategic advantage, leaving Hitler deeply vexed. It was then that General Erich von Manstein presented an audacious plan. He proposed a direct attack on France through Belgium, designed to draw out the main British and French forces. Subsequently, German divisions would bypass the Maginot Line by thrusting through the dense Ardennes forest, encircling and ultimately annihilating the Allied armies. Hitler swiftly embraced this ingenious suggestion. On May 10, over 2.5 numbers of German armored units surged. This journey plunges you into the heart of World War II. The formidable Maginot Experienced the sweeping launched a devastating assault deep into mainland perspectives of Germany, Japan, simultaneously China, they struck at the rear of the Anglo-French forces. Drama like by this irresistible German progression, the Allied armies retreated steadily. Pursued relentlessly by the Germans all the way to Europe, ultimately succumbed to defeat. In a remarkable feat of evacuation facilitated by a multitude of British vessels, 400,000 Anglo-French, the Allied powers, notably transported across the Channel, were determined to cripple Germany and prevent General Guderian's armoured forces. They compelled the nation to sign the Treaty of Versailles, unleashed a lightning attack, stripped Germany of 1/5 of its territory. Leveraging their signature tactics, Germany imposed a staggering 50 billion German marks territorial reparation. By June 22, this harsh settlement ignited once lauded as Europe's military power, had been completely overrun by German forces after a mere 32 days of fighting. To salvage the economy, half of Europe now under German dominion, Hitler's arrogance measure no continuous printing of victorious, he simply could not conceive this tactic, however, swiftly backfired. Soon after he commenced the rampant invasion of Brit currency, triggered an unprecedented hyperinflation. However, given Britain's geographical by 1922, 900 German marks could secure only a single Germany's famed blitzkrieg tactics. Nader, a loaf of bread, fetched an astronomical Hitler resolved to employ air naval superiority to decisively subdue Britain, seemingly overlooking Germany's economy, Navy and Royal Air Force. Amidst this economic wreckage, a figure named Adolf July 10, 1940 rose to prominence. Operation Sea Lion was launched. Political career became the largest aerial presence in German beer halls. British and German aircraft engaged in a ferocious Germany's long clash in the skies above Britain, involving a staggering the despairing masses, he declared. Since she had no other choice, unparalleled in human history. He frequently pledged that every German citizen would delivering a crushing blow to Nazi Germany, forcing Hitler to abandon bread would be relegated channel invasion plan, and that he would ultimately shred the humiliating treaty on June 2, 1941. His fervent Hitler abruptly abrogated the Molotov-Ribbentrop non-aggression surge day by day. 5 million soldiers. By 1932, mass invasion had ascended to become Germany's largest Soviet Red Army, called entirely off, securing an impressive 3 million votes, was appointed within a mere few hours. Driven by an ambitious Soviet aircraft, were annihilated on the ground. Hitler aggressively championed heavy industry and military. German blitzkrieg offensive virtually obliterated the shackles of the Treaty of Versailles, enforced by September 1940, severely curtailed sustained the loss of nearly 90 divisions. German forces had plunged over 500 kilometers deep into Soviet and any form of air force, including naval aviation and military aircraft, were bearing down directly on the Soviet. At this impasse, an unexpected lifeline response, Stalin galvanized the entire Soviet nation that British and French dominance in Europe might undermine its own global. On November 7th, the U.S. extended a substantial staged in Moscow $60 billion in loans. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet Red Army soldiers marched through the iconic bolstered by this formidable American aid. Germany embarked by clandestine military. Every soldier who participated in the parade asserting immediately dispatched Germany under Hitler masterfully. Following this, Stalin redeployed all Siberian troops from military to reinforce the Moscow. Under the guise of manufacturing thus began civilian aircraft to Moscow. Thousands of this titanic struggle engaged a staggering 4 million Soviet and German secretly churned casualties soaring to circumvent the ban on Air Force aviation. It was quite literally a battle for the very survival of the Soviet. When the army was restricted tragically for the invaders, German forces were confronted by the harshest winter-downs of the 20th century. These seemingly illogical extended supply lines and woefully inadequate equipment propelling Germany's military Nazi Germany suffered a devastating defeat. Hitler was convinced Stalin subsequently launched a major counter-offensive, smashing through German defences around Moscow and driving them back 200 kilometers. Consequently, he spared this not only shattered Hitler's funneling the nation's entire resource Soviet military in 3 months, but also military expenditures skyrocketed. The world, the 1938 army had swelled to 1 million personnel. Military spending on December 7, 1941, Japan launched a sudden, audacious attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor. At this juncture, Hitler's ambition carried expansion 40 aircraft. The Japanese March 1938 saw Hitler annex oil-rich several hours resulting in approximately 3,000 casualties. The destruction blind eye to this blatant aggression aircraft and moved Japanese losses. Hitler's arrogance amounted to around 100 considerable oil reserves. Nazi Germany's following day, U.S. President Roosevelt formally declared war on Japan, brazenly currently on Germany, Italy, Japan's fellow roused Britain and France. With these declarations, World War II escalated to greatest geographical and human-scale declaration. Early 1942 saw Germany's allies routed by rationalities in the North African campaign. Convinced the response Adolf Hitler, the Nazi Germany, appointed Erwin Rommel to command the African. Shortly thereafter, diverting over 100 troops from the next European front to bolster Italian. On August 23, 1939, Germany and under the relentless German offensive Ribbentrop North Africa swift disagreement between two non-contiguous nations delineated their shared border through Polish territory to Stalingrad, unambiguous Soviet for partitioning Poland. This city was a stage was now set Soviet oil production. In the pre-dawn hours Hitler believed September 1939, Stalingrad, Germany unleashed German armies attack on Poland. Strategic a massive force of 1.5 million systematically wear down the Soviets. United World on July 17, 1942, German forces a blitzkrieg like 1.5 million. Germany advanced 100 divisions, unleashed a furious assault. General Guderian Stalin immediately issued spearheaded the charge, an unstoppable juggernaut, starkly forbidding soldiers and officers on September 3, Britain and France with insubordinates facing immediate execution. Yet this declaration was unaccompanied by military struggle spanning hundreds of kilometers. Observed as Germany devolved into the most brutal engagement in human history. Over 5 ferocious German troops were embroiled. Poland sustained casualties tragically steadily receded. 5 million. On September 17, shells rained down. The Soviet Union joined the fray, invading soldiers from both armies grabbed between the combined on every inch of the devastated Soviet Union. The average survival time for a frontline soldier was less than 24 hours. By October 6, 1939, Poland succumbed less 35 days of resistance during the territory completely subjugated by the terrifyingly brief 10 On November 26, both sides engaged in unbelievably savage struggles for control of every street and building. The sheer brutality of the massive assault transcended description. What many anticipated an overwhelming Soviet victory, however, utterly defied expectations. This monumental clash to buckle under the mighty Soviet invasion. World War II. The Finnish army not only decisively halted the German offensive, but also catastrophically winter, frozen 1.5 million elite Nazi Germans to their advantage. Stalingrad marked the definitive transition from Nazi Germany's seemingly unstoppable ascent. The war spanned only 3 months. From that moment forward, the Soviet army rested the strategic initiative, 22 divisions decimated, and the tide of victory. In the aftermath, the Soviets only managed to annex a tenth of Finland's territory. In October of that Soviet Union had Britain dealt a decisive blow to German forces in the Battle of Al Alamein in This embarrassing performance effectively placing Germany on the Soviet military power to hit, capitalizing on winter war inadvertently laying back Anglo-American forces Germany's subsequent invasion across North Africa in November. April 1940 under a powerful Allied offensive gaze, they swiftly seized vast driven by the insatiable need territory resources. On March 17, on April 9, German the Allies launched a lightning campaign, a battle that unfolded over 2 months. Given Denmark's modest national power, German and Italian required a mere 4 hours to completely subdue the country. Overwhelming strategic resources, abundant supplies of numerical superiority of the as a coastal nation, Norway necessitated a combined arms approach situation, with Germany primarily deploying naval and air forces alongside amphibious. In the wake of this campaign, over 230,000 the nocturnal timing of the German invasion had caused Norwegian forces and the Axis powers were completely preventing any timely defence. Shortly thereafter, 12 hours, the Norwegian capital, determined to dismantle Italy's fascist government, given the subsequent massive and British invasion of Sicily in July 1943, committing nearly capitulated to Germany after just 60 days. After a month of intense fighting in Sicily, Nazi Germany then over this crucial operation not only pried open the southern gateway to Europe, Belgium, but also dealt a severe blow. Having subjugated these nations, Hitler ultimately precipitating Italy's surrender. At the time, by now, Hitler understood that a complete reversal of fortune boasted on a decisive victory on the Eastern Front was protected by the July 5 impregnable Maginot Line along Soviet and German forces collided in the cursed region of the Soviet Union as what would become the largest tank battle, leaving Hitler deeply vexed. The Battle of Kursk engulfed over 8,000 tanks, 5,000 aircraft, and more than 2.8 million soldiers direct Soviet and German side. Belgium designed to draw out the main British and French forces. Thousands of shells erupted simultaneously. German divisions would bypass the Maginot Line, and artillery pieces were reduced to veritable mountains of wreckage, and ultimately annihilating. Despite achieving a formidable 1-3-3 kill ratio, embraced the ingenious assumed numerical superiority. Crafted over 2.5 months of German plans production, this journey plunges you into the heart of World War 23. The Soviet Red Army had successfully secured the Kursk and distinct perspectives of Germany, signaling the end of China, and the United States. In this colossal engagement, German forces like understanding of casualties in crippling losses through the eyes of different and artillery. Following how did Nazi German forces were rendered incapable of launching any further large-scale offensive following its defeat in World War I. On that moment, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front was irrevocably. The Allied powers, notably Britain and France, from January 1944 Germany, the Soviet Red Army unleashed relentless offensives. They compelled the nation to sign the systematically reclaiming vast and unequal accord that stripped Germany. Meanwhile, by June 5, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, all its overseas Supreme Commander of the Anglo-American imposed a staggering $150 billion German colossal war of 2.88 million. This harsh settlement ignited a firestorm of public protest, and the very next day, June 6, millions of Allied troops launched the monumental amphibious land the economy. President Hindenburg resorted to Operation famous measure codenamed continuous printing under a ferocious Allied aerial bombardment. This tactic, however, swiftly backfired as the rampant overissuance of currency triggered German soldiers, largely deflationist, could only fire hopelessly skyward. By 1920, over 4,000 Allied landing craft sped towards the Normandy beaches, and at its nadir, battleships unleashed an almost continuous barrage of shells on German positions, so vast it transforming them instantly into an inferno. Germany's economy most German forces, amidst by surprise and having failed to establish named Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party catastrophic losses. Enabling Allied political career, Hitler secured their landing presence in Normandy with a single day. Delivering by this irresistible Allied offensive, German forces were found economic and political. In a mere 2 months, Anglo-American forces, he declared, Nazi Germans, since you have no other choice, River and triumphantly liberated the French. He frequently pledged that every German citizen would own a car. The Soviet Red Army launched Operation Bagration on the East, relegated to history, amassing 2.4 million troops. The Soviet Union initiated a massive counteroffensive. His fervent rhetoric resonated deeply in support. Under this overwhelming Soviet onslaught, German forces found themselves utterly the Nazis had ascended to become Germany's in a stunning 2-month advance. The Soviet Red Army surged by 53 million votes, completely annihilating Germany's elite army. Driven by an ambition to swift national development, Hitler pushing relentlessly all the way to the Polish military remnant. By this juncture, Germany was ensnared in a treaty of Versailles enforced by Britain. Prolonged, devastating fight curtailed Germany's military might, its army, leading to a drastic reduction in Nazi Germany's forces, critical shortage, and any form of air force, including naval aviation, desperately address the aircraft. Hitler enacted a ruthless conscription at this impasse, and unexpected lifeline emerged into 20 to join the military to defend his crumbling British and French dominance in Europe. According to Nazi German high global estimates, the US mobilization could theoretically swell the army to US dollars in loans to Germany. However, plagued by myriad logistical and systemic problems, bolstered by final tally of American aid, Germany embarked on a clandestine. Even the active army suffered from a severe aging crisis. Openly asserting brutal war had affected Germany under Hitler, entire generation of various pretexts to mask. Furthermore, their armaments were gravely outdated. Under the guise of civilian rifles, civilian aircraft hastily manufactured thousands of planes, tanks, even in the face of this increasingly dire situation, Hitler remained defiantly resolved to fight the Allied Air Force. Aviation clubs were open. Following extensive discussions, when the army was restricted to 100, Hitler determined to launch a large-scale counteroffensive in a desperate bid to turn these seemingly illogical maneuvers deftly envisioned another armored blitzkrieg through the Ardennes, propelling Germany's military strength along the French-German border. Hitler was convinced that only through formidable military power could Germany Chamonix had the oppressive chains imposed by Britain, and thus recreate the humiliating Allied evacuation. Spared no expense. The broader goal was to funnel the nation's entire resources into military industrial development before finally turning military expenditure skyrocketed. Soviet Union. By 1938, Army swelled to 1.1 million personnel, and military expenditure assumed a staggering 50%. This marked Nazi Germany's final desperate unparalleled offensive for its ultimate downfall. At this juncture, Hitler's last audacious military became Europe. Over 300,000 German troops 1938 saw Hitler annex rich strong Anglo-French fire. Initially, the German blitzkrieg offensive turned a blind eye to this blatant aggression, causing them to retreat steadily. Hitler's arrogance. However, the Allies, with Austria's considerable oil reserves, Nazi Germany's engaging the Nazi German forces in fierce house-to-house and brazenly village combat throughout the Ardennes. This act finally roused Britain and France to pay a gruesome price for every inch of German aggression against European nations. After prolonged, intense fighting, the Allies eventually deployed nearly a million. Yet Hitler, utterly consumed by irrationality, German forces back threats, convinced that Britain and France were too timid. Hitler's desperate German had indirectly failed. Shortly thereafter, his gaze fixed on Poland as the next target. From the east, the Soviet army launched 23, 1939. Germany and the Soviet Union allied Molotov-Ribbentrop non-aggression pact. Hitler fast agreement between two increasingly agitated nations still delineated their shared border through Polish terror. On January 12, an unambiguous blueprint, Stalin mobilized the entire Soviet nation. The stage was now set, unleashing the Vistula offensive with over 3 million hours 2001, 1939. Germany unleashed a surprise under this formidable Soviet onslaught. A massive force of 1.5 million troops arrayed across the mere 20 days, the Soviet Union completely overthrowing its devastating blitzkrieg lightning war tactics. Germany advanced. As the Soviet Red Army advanced with irresistible General Guderian's Berlin's radio stations spearheaded the charge and unstoppable juggernaut, demonizing the Soviets as terrifying. On September 3, this sparked widespread panic and mass civilian evacuations across Germany. This declaration was unaccompanied by Soviet Red Army's advance was breathtaking. They passively observed. By February 10, they had surged 200 kilometers, reaching the Oder River a mere 70 kilometers ferocious German offensive. Berlin. Poland sustained grievous losses. Continuous rapid advance had exhausted many Soviet soldiers. The Soviet Union joined the fray, invading Poland from simultaneously. Hitler issued unyielding orders for German forces to fight to the death. Poland's fate to guarantee ultimate victory. Soviet Red Army 699 Poland succumbed a mere 35 days of resistance. The territory completely allowing frontline Soviet troops to rest and recuperate. On November 26, 1939, the Soviet Union unexpectedly massed. The Soviet Union unleashed over 5,000 aircraft, unleashed a massive continuous day and night bombardment. What many anticipated as an overwhelming weeks of this aerial bombardment, utterly defied Red Army deployed 2.6 million troops to buckle under the mighty Soviet invasion. The Finnish army adopted an ingenious defensive strategy. Hitler mobilized almost every available German soldier, frozen swamps and dense forests to their advantage. Yet, confronting a Soviet army that outnumbered and inflicted crippling losses on the Soviet forces was a mere drop. The war spanned only 3 months. Under the Soviet Red Army's multi, a staggering 400,000. Germany suffered catastrophic 22 divisions decimated. Many German soldiers recognized the Soviets only managed to lay down their arms and surrender. By April 29, Soviet forces had progressively advanced into Berlin's city center. Hitler knew his end was nigh. He understood that perceived weakness of Soviet military power, consumed by despair. The Winter War inadvertently committed suicide ground level even Germany's subsequent invasion of the Soviet Union. On that same April 30, the raising of the Soviet flag over the Reichstag building in Berlin, insatiable complete collapse of Nazi Germany. On April 9,
German Field Marshal Keitel signed the instrument of unconditional
Denmark's
surrender,
modest national power,
officially
German
bringing
troops
an end
required
to
a
the
mere 4 hours to
World War
completely
II.
subdue the country.
Only Japan and the
Following this
Pacific
swift
maintained
conquest,
its stubborn
German
resistance,
forces
but its
invaded
demise
Norway.
was clearly foreshadowed.
As a coastal
On July
nation,
26,
Norway necessitated
1945,
combined
the
arms
Potsdam
approach.
Conference,
The
leaders
Germany
of
primarily
Britain,
deploying
US,
naval
and
and
the
air
Soviet
forces
Union issued a
alongside
stark
previous
ultimatum
landings
demanding
for
Japan's
full-scale
unconditional surrender.
The nocturnal
warning of
timing of the German
utter
invasion
destruction.
caught Norwegian
Their
forces
turns were
completely
rejected.
off guard.
Japan,
Japan,
however,
however,
swiftly
swiftly
rebuffed
rebuffed
this demand.
Within a mere
With the
12 hours,
acquiescence
the
of
Norwegian
Britain and
capital
Soviet
fell
Union,
into
the
German
US
hands.
deployed an atomic
Even the
bomb on
subsequent
Hiroshima.
arrival of British
3 days later,
reinforcements
another
to
atomic bomb
Japan
devastated
Norway
Nagasaki.
capitulated to
These two
Germany after
cataclysms
just 60
caused an
days of
estimated
fighting.
4,000
In swift
Japanese
succession,
casualties.
Nazi Germany
On
then
August
over
15,
in Luxembourg,
1945,
Japan finally
the
announced
Netherlands
its
unconditional
unconditional
surrender,
surrender,
Belgium
World
World
War
War
II
II to an official
having
close.
subjugated
Between
these nations,
1939 and
Hitler next
1945,
decided to
drawn in
France,
61 countries
time
and
France
nearly
possessed
possessed
Europe's
Europe's most formidable
resulting in
army,
over
boasting
90
3
million
million
casualties.
soldiers.
It
Was
irrevocably
protected by the
reshaped the
supposedly
global order for the
impregnable
next half
Maginot
century.
Line along its German
Profoundly
border.
altered the course
A
of
direct
human
frontal
history.
assault on the French
How many
forces
nations did
offered no
Japan
strategic
ultimately
advantage,
conquer?
leaving
And how
Hitler
did
deeply
Japan,
vexed,
despite
which was
subjugating
then that
vast
General
swaths of
Erich
China,
Hahn eventually
Manstein
meet its defeat in a Dacian
Japan at its core was a
He proposed
militaristic
a thin,
nation,
direct
deeply
attack on
ingrained with
France
an
through
ideology
Belgium
designed to draw out the main
British
British and French forces.
Grappling with a struggling domestic
Subsequently,
economy,
German
Japan
divisions
orchestrated
bypassed
the
the
Maginot
Maginot
Line
Line
by
by
thrusting
thrusting
through the dense Ardennes forest. Japanese
encircling
forces
and
ultimately
ultimately
detonated
annihilated
the
section of
Allied
the South
armies.
Manchurian Railway they
Hitler
had
swiftly
constructed,
embraced this
then
ingenious
falsely blamed
suggestion.
China, using this
Crafted over
manufacturing
2.5
pretext to
months
launch
of
their
meticulous
invasion.
production.
Under
This
the
journey
Chinese
plunges
nationalist
you into the
army's
heart
policy of
war,
non-resistance,
China's three
experienced
northeastern
the sweeping
provinces
narrative
were
of the
swiftly
conflict
overrun
from
by
the
Japanese
distinct
perspectives of Germany,
who then
Japan,
established the
China,
puppet
and
state
the
of
United
Manchukuo,
States,
offering a
the
detailed
industrial output
drama
from
like
these three
understanding
northeastern
of the
provinces
wars
alone
intricate
accounted for a
progression
staggering
through
6
6%
different
Chinese
nations.
total.
Furnishing
How did
Japan
Nazi
with
Germany,
an
having swept
inexhaustible
across
supply
much
of
of Europe,
resources for
ultimately
its
succumbed
subsequent
to defeat?
larger invasion of
Following
China?
its defeat in
Concurrently, the
World War
Japanese
I,
military
November
underwent sweeping
1918,
reforms,
Germany
significantly
faced a
increasing
punitive
its recruitment.
The Allied powers,
notably
notably
Britain and France,
the
the
Japanese
Japanese
army
army
had
had
swelled
swelled
Germany
Germany
and
to
vetted
its
personnel,
resurgence.
and Japan
They
formally
compelled
allied
the
itself
nation
with
to sign
Germany
the
by
Treaty of
signing the
Versailles,
Anti-Comintern
an unequal
Pact,
accord that
thereby
stripped Germany
officially
of
joining
one
the
fifth
fastest
of
of
its
its
territory.
Japan's
All
grand
its
ambition
ambition
was the conquest of
colonies,
Asia,
and
mirroring
imposed a
Germany's
staggering
designs
50
on
billion
Europe.
German
In
marks in war
1937,
reparations.
Japan progressively
This harsh
seized
settlement
Ibi,
in
Tanjin,
Tanjin
and other key areas,
public
Beijing
protest and
firmly in
deep
its
seated
sights.
resentment
On July
across the
7,
German populace.
Japan ignited the
In
long
a desperate
planned
bid to
Luger
salvage
Bridge
the
incident
economy,
to Marco Polo
President
Bridge
Hindenburg
incident,
resorted
an
to
event
a
that marked the
full-scale
outbreak
outbreak of
the
war
war
of
of
resistance
banknotes
to
against
against
Japanese
Japanese
aggression.
aggression.
This tactic,
As
however,
Chinese
swiftly
cities rapidly
backfired.
fell under
The
Japanese
rampant
occupation,
over-issuance of
Western
currency
nations
triggered an
vociferously
unprecedented
condemned
hyperinflation
hyperinflation
of the German mark.
Nevertheless,
By 1920,
Japanese
900 German
forces
marks could
relentlessly
procure only a
with their
single
invasion of
US dollar,
prompting
many
many Western countries
to
to
initiate
fetch
oil
oil
export
astronomical
embargoes against
500,000
Japan.
marks, a sum
In
so
September
vast it literally
1939, driven by the
wouldn't fit
desire
inside.
for more strategic
Germany's economy lay in utter ruin.
Japan turned its
Amidst
gaze
this
northward,
economic
invading
wreckage,
the Soviet
a
Union.
figure named Adolf
This
Hitler
led to the
and his
Battle
Nazi
of
Party
Kulm,
rose to prominence,
which culminated in a
his
decisive
nasty political
Japanese
career.
defeat and the
Hitler
grim
became
fate
a
of
familiar
hundreds of
presence in
Japanese
German
prisoners of
halls,
war,
delivering
consigned to forced
fiery
labor in
speeches that
Siberia.
meticulously
Witnessing
dissected
Nazi Germany's seemingly
profound
unstoppable
economic
victories in
political
Europe,
woes.
Japan
the
grew eager
despairing
to
masses, he
replicate such
declared,
success.
since you have no
Their
other
attention
choice,
consequently
join my party.
shifted to Southeast
He
Asia
frequently
as the
pledged
next
that
target
every
for
German
aggression.
citizen would own a
Under
car.
the swift and
But the
powerful
days
offensive
offensive
of
of
the
the
Japanese
Japanese
Navy nations
marked
such as
Red
Vietnam,
Vietnam,
relegated
the
to
Philippines,
history,
Indonesia,
and that he
all
would
succumbed
ultimately
to
shred the
Japanese
humiliating
invasions.
treaty
On
of
September
Versailles.
26, 1940,
His fervent rhetoric
Japan
resonated
solidified
deeply in
its
support
alliance
of
by
the
signing the
Nazi
Tripartite
Pact
Pact
with
with
Germany
Germany
and Italy.
By
thereby
1932,
forming
the Nazis had ascended to become Germany's largest securing an impressive which promptly responded by imposing an embargo on the export of oil,
by an
steel,
ambition
and other
swift
critical
national
strategic
development.
resources.
Hitler
Hitler
aggressively
aggressively
championed
to
heavy
secure its
industry
vital
and
war
military
resources.
resources.
Japan further
Yet
broadened
the
its
shackles of the
invasion
Treaty
scope,
of Versailles
striving to establish
by
by Britain
Greater
and
East
France
Asia
severely
prosperity
curtailed
sphere.
Germany's military
Domestically,
might.
the
Its
conquest
army
of
was
China
capped
was
at
deemed
100,000
paramount,
men,
and a
its
pervasive
navy
militaristic
Marxistic ideology was
and any
rigorously
form of
instilled in
air
young
force,
people in
including
naval
intellectual
aviation and
alike.
military aircraft
To augment its
outright
military
big
prowess,
At this
Japan
established
established
unexpected lifeline emerged
from the
forward with
United
the singular
States.
aim of dominating
Concerned that
Asia
British
and
and
French
Pacific
dominance
region
in Europe might
establishing
undermine its own
hegemonic
global
control.
standing.
Emperor
The US
Hirohito
was
extended
elevated
a
to the status of the
$160
supreme
billion
leader
US dollars
deified
in
and
loans
worshipped
to a
Germany,
cult
like
intending to
ideologies
foster a
counterbalance.
counterbalance.
Bolstered by this
many
formidable
Japanese
American aid,
officers
Germany
and soldiers
embarked
were
on a plan
indoctrinated
to
to
willingly
militarily
sacrifice
expansion
themselves for the
before
emperor,
openly
facing
asserting its
imperial
strength
without
without
Nazi
hesitation.
Germany under Hitler
Despite its
masterfully
setback
crafted
against the
various
Soviet
pretexts
Union,
to mask
Japan's
its
aggressive
burgeoning
expansion
military
across
development.
East and
Under
Southeast
the
Asia
guise of
proved
manufacturing
largely
civilian
successful.
aircraft and
From
tractors
Myanmar
to
through
Vietnam
planes,
and onto
tanks,
the
armored
Philippines and
vehicles,
Indonesia,
and artillery
including vast
pieces were
stretches of the
secretly
Pacific
churned out.
region,
To circumvent the ban on an Air Force
to
aviation
facilitate
clubs
further
were openly
invasions, Japan
established.
devoted substantial
When the army was
resources
restricted to
developing
100
Hitler ingeniously
notably
swelled the
constructing
ranks
the
of
largest
German
battleship
police
in history, the
800,000.
Yamato.
These seemingly illogical naval aircraft and warships were strategically deployed across various Germany's military station to rapid
Faced
growth.
with persistent
Hitler was convinced that only through formidable military power could Germany commander-in-chief of the Japanese combined fleet. Britain conceived a daring strategy of a surprise attack on the US Pacific Fleet stationed at funneling the nation's entire resources
audacious
into military industrial the US Navy.
Military
Thereby
expenditure
stripping America of its dominant position in the
1938 Army had
Pacific and
swelled
allowing
to
Japan to assert a monopoly over the entire region.
A staggering
On December 7, 1941, Japan launched its devastating strike globally.
6 aircraft
At this
carriers
juncture,
and
Hitler's
440
ambition
aircraft
for
against
expansion
the unprepared
prepared
US
US
forces at Pearl
March
Harbor.
1938
Several hours
Hitler
saw
annexed
oil
over
rich
3,000
Austria
American
without
casualties,
casualties,
destroying 12 battleships. Astonishingly, Britain and
180
France
aircraft.
turned a blind eye
Japanese
to
losses
this blatant
conversely were
aggression,
minimal,
just over 100 casualties Hitler's
31
arrogance.
aircraft.
With Austria's
Following day,
considerable
US
oil
President
reserves, Roosevelt
Nazi Germany's
declared war on
national
Japan,
strength
a
surged
declaration
further.
that propelled World
On
War
March
II.
15,
He
he
brazenly
brazenly
seized
seized
Czechoslovakia.
Following Pearl
This act
Harbor,
finally
Japan
roused
swept
Britain
through
through
other
other
Southeast
Southeast
Asian
Asian stern
nations,
warning, including the German aggression against European
Notably on the
nations,
Malay
resulted in
Peninsula,
a
Japanese
declaration
forces
war.
under Yamamoto's strategic
Yet Hitler,
plan,
utterly consumed by irrationality, dismissed
British
their
threats
threats
in a mere
convinced
60
that Britain
days,
and France were
expelling
too
them
timid
from
to
the
engage
peninsula.
Germany in
Though
direct
Japan
conflict.
initially savoured a string
Shortly
of unbroken
thereafter,
victories,
his gaze
fixed
faced
on Poland
Poland
as the next
retaliatory
target
strike
for invasion.
of the United
On
States.
August 23,
America's fires of
1939,
vengeance were now
Germany and
fully
the Soviet
ignited.
Union
On April 18,
Molotov-Ribbentrop
1942, the
non-aggression
US
pact.
This agreement
Carrier
between
Hornet
two non-traverse nations delineated their shared
launching an
border
unprecedented
through
air
Polish
raid on
territory,
Tokyo,
an unambiguous
Japan,
blueprint,
an operation
famously known as the Durable
The stage
Raid.
was now set for the imminent
16
eruption
bombers
of war.
targeted military
Pre-dawn hours of
installations
September
within
1,
Japan.
1939.
Subsequently,
Germany
US
unleashed
airmen
a
involved
surprise
attack
attack
helped to make
on
emergency
A
landings
massive
in
force of
China's
1.5
Jiangsu
million troops
Shanghai
raid
region.
across 3 fronts
In brutal
ignited World War
retaliation
II.
for these airmen and the
Employing
raid's
itself,
devastating
Japan
blitzkrieg
conducted
conducted
extensive
extensive
searches,
Germany
during
advanced
which
numerous
numerous
innocent Chinese civilians were massacred.
General Guderian's 19
A month later,
division
Japan
spearheaded
engaged
the charge,
Anglo-American
an
allied
unstoppable
forces in the battle
juggernaut
across
across
the
the
sea off eastern Indonesia.
On September 3,
the Allies
Britain
emerged
emerged
formally
victorious,
declared war on
inflicting
Germany.
a devastating defeat
Yet
on
this
Japan,
declaration was
causing its
unaccompanied
ambitious
by
plan to
military
invade
aid
Australia.
Poland. They
Directed
passively
by the
observed
deteriorating
Germany
situation,
consume the nation.
Admiral Yamamoto
Policy
Aizaru, who sought to establish
military
under
bases
the
and
ferocious
resume
German
attacks on the
offensive.
US.
Poland sustained
Hawaii.
grievous losses.
To achieve this, he meticulously planned a decisive
September 17, the
the
Soviet Union joined the fray.
However,
invading Poland
Japan
from the
gravely
east.
overestimated
Trapped
its
between
own
the
military
combined onslaught of
capabilities.
Germany
On June
and the
4,
Soviet
1942,
Union, Poland's
battle at
fate was
Midway
irrevocably
erupted.
sealed.
In this pivotal engagement,
By October
Japanese
699,
forces
Poland
suffered
succumbed
a
under 35
days of
4 aircraft
resistance,
carriers
territory
and
completely
350
subjugated by
aircraft
the
destroyed
invading
alongside
powers.
3
On
100
November
casualties.
26,
This
1939,
battle proved to be
the
the
Soviet
undeniable
Union
turning point
unexpectedly
in the
massed
Pacific
a million
War,
troops
severely
along the
crippling
Finnish
Japan's
border and
Pacific
unleashed a
naval
massive
fleet.
assault on Finland.
Plagued by years of
What many anticipated as an overwhelming
Soviet
resources,
victory,
the majority
however,
of
utterly
Japan's
defied
military
expectation.
weaponry become increasingly
Finland refused to
obsolete.
buckle under
The
the
strategic focus of military development, the Finnish army adopted the Army's defensive strategy,
compelling
leveraging
Japan to
transition
winter,
from
frozen
offensive to
swamps
defensive
and
dense
posture.
forests to their advantage.
Driven by an
Employing
urgent
fierce
initiative
guerrilla
to
tactics that
reduce
inflicted crippling
Japan
losses
poured
on
all
the
its
Soviet
available
forces.
funds into
But the
naval
war
and air
spanned
force
only
development.
3 months,
Yet
the
even this
Soviet Union
proved
suffered a
woefully
staggering
insufficient.
400,000
In December
casualties.
1942, US forces launched a formidable attack.
In the
on
aftermath,
Japanese
the Soviets
positions on
only
the
managed to
Baikonur.
annex a tenth
Due to their
of
outdated
Finland's
equipment,
territory. Vast
the
numbers of
Soviet
Japanese
Union had
naval
won the
personnel
war,
were
but
lost
at a
in the
severe
brutal
cost to its
fighting.
prestige.
The tide of victory
This
definitively
embarrassing
began to
performance
shift
exposed
towards
the
the
perceived
United States.
weakness of Soviet
Throughout
military
1943,
power.
US forces
With
with
the
the
winter war
inadvertently
inadvertently
laying the
crucial
crucial
Marshall
groundwork
Islands.
with Germany's
Under the
subsequent
overwhelming might
invasion
of US
Soviet
firepower,
Union.
Japanese
April
forces sustained
1940 saw
immense
Hitler
losses,
pivot his gaze
steadily
towards northern
retreating.
Europe.
Driven
In
by the
1944,
insatiable
the Battle of
need
Leyte
for
Gulf,
resources.
the largest carrier
On April
carrier
German
engagement
forces
has launched a
history
lightning
saw
strike
Japanese
against Denmark.
forces suffer an utter
Given
defeat,
Denmark's modest
effectively
national
crippling
power,
the power
German
of the
troops
Japanese
required a
Navy
mere
in that
4 hours to
war.
completely subdue
Immediately
the country.
following this, the
Following
United
this
States
initiated
initiated
strategic operation against the Mariana Islands.
As a
where,
coastal
under
nation,
relentless
Norway
US
necessitated
firepower,
combined
Japan
arms
sustained
approach.
tremendous
With
losses.
Germany primarily deploying
Concurrently,
naval and air
Japan
forces
found itself
alongside
deeply entangled in the
landings
quagmire of the war in
full-scale
China,
offensive.
where the
The
Chinese
nocturnal
nationalist
timing of the
army
German
commenced
invasion
its
caught
major
Norwegian
counteroffensive.
forces
In
completely
July
off guard,
1944,
preventing
during
any
the brutal
timely
Battle of
defense.
Saipan,
Within a
Japanese
mere
forces
12 hours,
launched
the
Norwegian
suicidal
capital
charges
fell
but
into
to
German
no avail.
hands.
In
Even
that
the
battle,
subsequent
US
arrival
forces
of British
completely
annihilated all
reinforcements
Japanese
troops
troops on the
computed.
island, a grim total
Norway
of over
capitulated to
40,000
Germany
after just 60
1945
days
shared
of
in the
fighting. inconclusive phase of the
succession,
Pacific War.
Nazi Germany
March
then
witnessed
over
the
United
United
States
States
dispatching
dispatching
over
over
400
Netherlands
bombers in
in
successive
successive
waves
waves
to
to
execute a devastating
having
bombing
subjugated
campaign
these
against
nations,
Tokyo.
Hitler next
Japan.
fixed his sights on
Statistics
France.
indicate this
At the time,
inferno
France
caused
possessed
over 100,000 Japanese
formidable
casualties and
boasting
more than 1 million
civilians
civilians
and was
protected
In
by
that
the same
supposedly
Battle of
impregnable
Okinawa
Maginot Line
a
along
lost
its
brutal
German
engagement
in the Pacific
A direct
Theater,
frontal
erupted
assault
US
of French
casualties
forces
surpassed
offered a
those
strategic advantage,
while Japanese
leaving Hitler
casualties
deeply
sank
vexed.
upon
It was then that
20,000
virtually
German
obliterating the
Japanese
Japanese forces
presented
defending the
defending the
Iris
Iris
plan.
Simultaneously, Japan's Second Fleet launched desperate suicide Belgium designed to draw out the main British. However, US intelligence subsequently intercepted the German divisions would bypass the Despite the relentless onslaught through the kamikaze pilots, the US circling and leveraging its formidable firepower succeeded in sinking Hitler swiftly embraced this Yamato along with 9 other warships. Crafted over 2.5 on July 26, 1945, this journey plunges you into the Britain, the US, and the Soviet Union issued their demand for Japan's unconditional surrender. Japan, however, adamantly rejected this ultimatum, and the United States, consent of Britain and the Soviet Union, drama like understanding to deploy an atomic bomb on progression through the eyes. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb. How did Nazi Germany have these two unprecedented attacks led to an estimated 300,000 Japanese casualties? Following its defeat in World War I on 1911, Japan announced its unconditional surrender. The Allied powers, notably Britain and France, were determined. What was the Sino-Japanese War like through China's eyes? From 1931 to 1905, Japan's relentless 14-year invasion of China culminated in a hard-won victory for the Chinese military and civilians, albeit at the staggering cost of 35 million, and imposed a staggering 50 billion. What exactly did China endure during the War of Resistance? This harsh settlement ignited a firestorm. In 1929, the world plunged in the deepest and longest economic crisis in the history of capitalism. In a desperate Japan in particular felt the economy grip. President Hindenburg, to revive its ailing economy, stop Japan embraced a militaristic printing of banknotes, seeking to alleviate its chronic economic woes by plundering other countries' resources and forging a hegemonic empire. On September 18, 1931, the Japanese army orchestrated a staged incident in northeast China, secretly blowing up a section of their own South Manchurian railway and falsely blaming China. Using this as a flimsy pretext, they shelled the Beiding barracks in Shenyang, unleashing the long-planned September 18th incident. Germany's economy lay deployed 300,000 troops to invade China. Wreckage, in the face of the nationalist army's policy of non-resistance, China's 3 northeastern provinces swiftly fell to Japanese forces, who then established the puppet state of Manchukuo, delivering fiery. These 3 provinces, contributing 6% of China's industrial output at the time, became a veritable war chest to the despairing, providing an endless supply of resources for its subsequent invasion, including 2 6-2 aircraft, 60,000 rifles and 180 million rounds of ammunition. On January 20, 1932, Japan suddenly attacked Shanghai, engaging in fierce combat, and that he would ultimately shred the humiliating. This became known as the January 20th incident, or the First Battle of Shanghai. A total of 104,000 troops from both sides were embroiled in the conflict. By 1932, thanks to the valiant resistance of the Chinese army, they ultimately emerged victorious in this battle, securing an impressive. This not only dealt a significant blow to Japanese hobras, but also driven by an ambitious time for the Chinese army to build a resistance. Hitler aggressively championed. On February 2093, 100,000 Japanese forces launched an assault on China's Treaty, initiating the battle forced by Britain and due to the Chinese army's inadequate Germany's military, numerical inferiority, and low morale among the northeastern army, its navy drastically restricted. On any 4 province too had fallen to naval aviation and military aircraft. This all 4 northeastern provinces were firmly in Japanese hands. An unexpected life. However, this failed to satiate Japan's insatiable hunger for expansion. That British and French between 1934 and 36, the Japanese military embarked on extensive. The US extended a substantial. By 1937, Japan's army swelled to 1.3 million personnel, and it formally joined the fascist bloc by signing the Tripartite Pact. Bolstered by this formidable American aid, Japan's ambition was to conquer Asia, while Germany and Italy set their sights on Europe. On July 7, 1937, Japan ignited the long-anticipated Lugu Bridge incident and Marco Polo Bridge incident. The surprise attack on Beijing kind of led to the guise of Chinese forces, marking the full-scale outbreak of the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression. Under the powerful Japanese offensive, the Chinese army was largely defenseless, on an air to retreat aviation clubs. In less than a month, Japan rapidly occupied when the army was restricted to 100 key areas. Ingeniously swelled the continuously victorious Japanese forces, brimming with boundless arrogance, seemingly illogically themselves invincible, leading them to declare an audacious plan to compel Germany's military strength to rapid. Soon after, Japan trained its sights on Shanghai as its next target. Military power. On August 9, 1937, Japanese naval lieutenant Oyama Izio and a soldier deliberately provoked Chinese forces by driving into Shanghai's Hongqiao airport, funneling the nation's entire resources into military industrial. Their patience worn thin, the Chinese garrison immediately shot and killed the 1938 army had swelled to Japan then used this incident as a pretext to demand a complete withdrawal of Chinese forces from Shanghai, a demand met with strong opposition from China globally. On August 13, Japan finally unleashed the full force of its aggressive ambitions, launching an attack on Chinese Hitler annexed the Chinese garrison was compelled to retaliate, thus igniting the Battle of Shanghai. Under Emperor Hirohito's orders, Japan deployed 4 aircraft carriers to fueled Hitler's arrogance and 400 aircraft to launch continuous assaults on Shanghai. Japanese forces committed 250,000 troops to the invasion. Subsequently, Shanghai mobilized nearly 800,000 troops finally roused British Shanghai, including elite central army units, as well as forces from Sichuan, Guangxi, Guangdong, and more than 10 other regional armies. Yet despite historical grievances from the Civil War, these armies set aside their differences to jointly resist the invasion in defense of their homeland. Due to outdated Chinese
Shortly
thereafter, his gaze fixed facing Japan's overwhelming firepower from land, sea and air. Chinese forces 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union. In this monumental battle, million elite nationalist troops were decimated. This agreement between thousands of contiguous nations delineated the largest battle in China's war of resistance against Japanese unambiguous blueprint. Though a defeat, it shattered Japan's audacious three-month conquest plan and demonstrated dawn hours of Chinese people's unwavering determination. Germany unleashed a surprise attack. Following the defeat in the Battle of Shanghai and due to heavy frontline losses, Chiang Kai-shek ultimately ordered the transfer of most troops its devastating blitzkrieg. On November 12, after Shanghai completely fell, large numbers of Japanese troops continued their irresistible advance. 19th Panzer Division on December 1, the Japanese forces, numbering 200,000 and supported by hundreds of aircraft, launched their invasion of France, formally declared. At this time, the Chinese garrison numbered only 150,000, facing a Japanese army superior in numbers, weaponry, and air power. The Nanjing garrison was completely overwhelmed. Japanese forces successfully captured Nanjing under the ferocious German offensive. With the fall of Nanjing, the Japanese brutality knew no bounds, leading to the atrocious September 17. The Soviet Union. During this period, 300,000 innocent civilians were slaughtered, and along their advance, Japanese forces unleashed a reign of terror marked by Poland's killing and looting. In January 1938, by October, aiming to connect the northern and southern battle lines, Japan planned to territory completely subjugated. Japanese forces immediately deployed 200,000 troops to attack the city. In response, the Chinese swiftly gathered 600,000 troops to defend the Finnish border. Yet, even with numerical superiority, the Chinese army's efforts what many anticipated as an battle raged for 4 months, ultimately ending in the Chinese defeat and the fall of Finland refused to. As Japan occupied northern Shandong in March 1938, the Finnish army adopted a March 16 strategy. The Chinese army launched a fierce counterattack in frozen swamps and dense thanks to the fierce and unyielding charges of countless Chinese soldiers. This battle achieved the greatest victory in the war of resistance against Japanese aggression to Soviet Union, eliminating 15,000 Japanese soldiers and severely blunting Japan's arrogance. However, subsequent strategic missteps by the nationalist army led to serious errors, resulting in the successive occupation of Shandong and Jiangsu by Japanese forces. But at a severe cost. To halt the Japanese advance, Chiang Kai-shek made the drastic decision to breach the Yellow River dikes at Hueyuanko. While this action temporarily stemmed the Japanese tide, it also caused a humanitarian catastrophe for many innocent civilians. The Yellow River's flooding displaced millions, destroyed vast areas of housing, and resulted in 600,000 casualties. On June 11, 1938, the Battle of Wu erupted. This was the largest German forces launched, the most devastating battle in the war of resistance against Japanese modest national power. German troops required a mere 4 hours casualties inflicted. The Japanese deployed 350,000 troops while the Chinese army committed invaded Norway. This battle lasted as a coastal nation. Japanese forces ultimately occupied all of Wuhan at the cost of Germany primarily casualties, thus losing their strategic offensive momentum. By this point, the war of resistance against Japanese aggression, German invasion caused Norwegian forces. In October 1938, US President Roosevelt began providing China with a fifth. Within a mere 12 hours, the Norwegian large quantities of weapons, equipment, and supplies were successfully transported to China from Bern, providing significant assistance for China's subsequent resistance to Germany. On September 1, 1939, Nazi Germany launched a three-pronged lightning Germany then owed 1.5 million troops, marking the official outbreak of World War II. Belgium, Germany, utilizing its having subjugated these nations, Polish defenses. In just 35 days, German forces occupied all of Poland. Most continuous victories of the fascist nations led to a pall of pessimism was protected by the supposedly impregnable. In September 1939, Japan deployed 100,000 troops and launched a massive offensive towards Changsha, initiating the battle. 3 battles of Changsha took place over 2.5 years. The Chinese army committed over 1.2 million troops, while Japanese forces committed over 400,000. China ultimately achieved victory at the cost of 90,000 casualties, while inflicting over 10,000 casualties on the Japanese. German division. The triumph in this battle severely crippled Japan's invading forces and derailed its strategic objective of forcing China to surrender the Allied armies. It also demonstrated to the world the Chinese army's unwavering determination. Crafted over 2.5 months in February 1940 to solidify its grip on China, Japan planned to install the pro-Japanese Wang Jingwei as a puppet leader and began establishing an army to counter Chinese forces. This move by Japan was quickly met with United condemnation from the United States. US President Roosevelt demanded that Japan immediately cease its aggression against China, but Japanese forces stubbornly pressed on their invasion. In April of the same year, the US froze all Japanese assets in the USS World War limited all exports of war resources to Japan, a clear declaration of support. The Allied powers, notably Britain and on August 20, to counter the guerrilla attacks by the 8th Road Army in North China, Japan concentrated 180,000 troops and launched its 100 regiments offensive counter-campaign. This battle raged for 4 months. The 8th Road Army deployed 105 regiments and imposing a staggering 50 billion German. The Chinese army utilized tactics to inflict harsh blows on Japanese forces. This battle ultimately resulted in 30,000 Chinese casualties and eliminated nearly 50,000 Japanese. In a desperate bid to salvage the economy, shattering Japan's mopping-up policy against Chinese forces and bolstering the morale of the entire military and civilian population in achieving victory in the war of resistance. Due to years of protracted warfare and severe resource shortages, Japan's forces grew increasingly desperate for vital war resources. By 1920, 900 German marks could procure only a single Isoroku Yamamoto, commander-in-chief of the Japanese combined fleet, decided to implement a long-planned scheme to launch a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The goal was to cripple the U.S. Navy and wrestle control of the Pacific named Adolf Hitler and his allowing Japan to dominate the entire region. On December 7, 1941, Japan dispatched 6 aircraft carriers with over 400 fighter planes to launch a large-scale surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, causing severe losses to the United States. To the next day, U.S. President Roosevelt declared war on Japan. Subsequently, the U.S. again provided China with a $500 million loan to assist in resisting the Japanese invasion. In February 1942, at the request of the British government, China dispatched that he would ultimately shred the forming the Chinese Expeditionary Force to fight in Burma. They successfully extricated Allied forces from a perilous predicament in Southeast Asia. On November 2, 1943, in the Battle of Chang, known as the Stalingrad of the East, Japanese forces massed 1,000 troops to attack Chang. The Chinese army urgently gathered over 200,000 troops and engaged in fierce fighting with the Japanese. Hitler aggressively the nationalist army valiantly held their ground, resisting the Japanese advance. The shackles of the Treaty of Versailles, after a month of fighting, the Chinese army won the battle, eliminating 20,000 Japanese soldiers. On April 4, 1944, to turn the tide of the war, Japan decided to launch large air force, including naval aviation. Subsequently, Japanese forces totaling 400,000 launched their ultimate desperate offensive in China, the Hinnan-Guangxi Campaign Operation Ichigo. This battle officially erupted might undermine its own global defend the southern regions. The Chinese army successfully deployed $2.5 million in loans to Germany. This campaign, although the Chinese army held a numerical advantage, strategic and tactical errors ultimately led to American aid. Germany embarked in just 8 months. China lost 700 soldiers, 4 provincial capitals, nearly 150 cities, 200 Germany under Hitler masterfully crafted, and over 60 million civilians fell under Japanese occupation. Although the Japanese won this battle, it also caused some heavy losses and failed to decisively alter the war's trajectory. Nor did it prevent U.S. aircraft from bombing the Japanese mainland. To impede the U.S. the ban on advance in the Pacific, Japan was forced to divert significant forces from China. When the army was restricted, steadily retreating troops ingeniously swelled the ranks. On March 1, the Chinese Expeditionary Force in its counteroffensive seemingly illogical maneuvers captured over 70 towns in Yemen, reclaiming 1,000 square kilometers of lost territory and eliminating nearly 50,000 Japanese soldiers. Seeking to reverse the deteriorating war situation, military power, Germany Chamonix had deployed 100,000 troops by Britain, supported by 150 aircraft, and launched a 3-prompt attack on Western. To resist the Japanese advance, the Chinese army successively committed 200,000 military expenditure. This was the last major battle of the war. 1938 army had swelled to 1 million personnel. This battle lasted 2 months and eliminated 30,000 Japanese soldiers. On April 3, 1945, the Soviet Red Army capturing the German capital of Berlin. At this juncture, Hitler's ambition for foreign expansion became irrepressible. Only fascist Japan continued its stubborn resistance, but its enemies in sight. On July 26, 1945, the leaders of Britain, the US, and the Soviet Union, a blind eye to this blatant, demanded Japan's unconditional surrender, warning that otherwise Japan faced with Austria's considerable oil reserves. However, this demand was swiftly rejected by Japan. Subsequently, the Soviet Union immediately deployed 1.5 million troops to attack the Japanese fighting army, long entrenched in China. Under the powerful Soviet offensive, Japanese forces suffered repeated defeats. On August 6, 1945, the US dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, utterly consumed by 3 days later, on August 9, the US dropped another atomic bomb on Nagasaki. These 2 atomic bombs caused an estimate of 300,000 Japanese casualties. Shortly thereafter, on August 15, 1945, Japan announced its unconditional surrender. On August 23, the war of resistance against Japanese aggression officially came to an end. How did the United States get drawn into this war? Why did it join the Allied powers to fight against the fascist bloc? And why did it ultimately have no choice but to drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan to end the war? The stage was now set. What did the United States truly experience the pre-dawn hours of September 1, 1939? After World War ended, the European battlefields, ravaged by 3 years of fierce fighting, were on the brink of bankruptcy. The United States, however, amassed vast fortunes by supplying weapons deploying its devastating emerging as a global economic powerhouse. American industry developed rapidly and numerous domestic enterprises and factories grew wealthy overnight. Between 1931 and 1939, militaristic nations led by Japan and Germany began purchasing large quantities of weapons, formally declared war on the United States to expand their military. This declaration was unaccompanied. Half of the resources they used to launch their wars came from the United States, laying bare their expansionist ambitions for foreign conquest. Subsequently, Germany and Japan launched invasions of other countries in Europe and Asia respectively. The spectre of war spread rapidly, particularly on September 5, 1939. Germany launched an invasion of Poland combined onslaught, marking the full-scale outbreak of World War II. Under Germany's Blitzkrieg offensive, Poland quickly lost 99 territories. After 28 days of fierce fighting, the entire country of Poland was occupied by Germany. In the following year, Germany successively occupied more than 10 countries, including Denmark, the Netherlands, France, and Norway. Germany had, by this point, subjugated much of Europe and had signed the Tripartite Pact an overwhelming Soviet victory. However, meanwhile, across the ocean, President Roosevelt declared that even if the United States was at peace, it should be ready to join the war adopted ingenious defensive. This was because Germany's widespread aggression seriously threatened America's position in Europe. How could Roosevelt be anything but anxious? And as if one problem wasn't enough, another emerged. Japan's aggression in East Asia and the Pacific met with alarming success. From Myanmar to Vietnam to then to the Philippines and Indonesia, including much of the Pacific region. In the aftermath, the Soviets only managed to annex a tenth. In just 6 months, Japan had occupied 4 million square kilometers of territory. Witnessing Japan's rapid aggression, the United States this embarrassing performance exposed the perceived. Consequently, the US banned the export of weapons, oil, and other strategic resources to Japan. This was a crippling blow to the Japanese, who were heavily reliant on imported resources. April 1940, to launch more invasions, Admiral Azurity Yamamoto, commander-in-chief of the Japanese Navy, decided to take a desperate and audacious gamble. On December 7, German forces launched a Japan dispatched 6 aircraft carriers with over 400 aircraft, heading directly towards Pearl Harbor, and launched a surprise attack on a large number of US warships and aircraft, causing heavy losses to the US Navy. Subsequently, as a coastal nation, declared Norway, Japan, and also declared war on Germany and Italy, with Germany primarily World War II engulfed the world on unprecedented scale. Afterward, US President Roosevelt implemented a new strategy of the German invasion of aircraft carriers, fighter planes, and tanks, preparing for a fierce counterattack against Japan. Within a mere 12 hours, a large number of private enterprises were converted into military subsequent arrival of companies like Ford, which produced automobiles, began to produce aircraft. Norway capitulated to Germany. Companies manufacturing consumer goods shifted to producing military equipment. Moreover, a large number of workers and civilians rapidly became soldiers, determined to resist Japanese vassalism. Immediately after, the United States unleashed its fiery wrath. In April 1942, the US carried out the Doolittle raid. Over 20 bombers launched a daring raid on mainland Japan, causing over 100 Japanese casualties, supposedly the beginning of the US-Japan Pacific War. On May 4, the US-Japan clashed in the Battle of Coral Sea, the first ever carrier battle of World War II. It was then that General Eric thwarting its audacious plans to invade Australia. Soon after, the US proposed a direct attack on in the Philippine Belgium, Japan defeated US forces and many American prisoners of war endured horrific treatment. German division, the entire Philippines also fell under Japanese control. To deliver a decisive blow to the US Navy on June 3, Japan decided to launch a surprise attack on the US Pacific base in Midway. However, this information had already been acquired by US intelligence, which had already deployed task forces 16 and 17 to the heart of World War II. In this battle, the 4 most powerful Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk by US forces. Even the first air fleet, once hailed as the hegemon of the Pacific, was annihilated overnight. In this battle, the United States achieved victory despite being outnumbered and outmatched, successfully turning the tide of the Pacific War. How did Nazi Germany have August across the US and Japan engaged in several months of fierce fighting on Guadalcanal? Following its defeat in World War I, the US, with its numerical advantage, won this battle. Subsequently, the US implemented an ingenious land-hopping strategy irresistible Germany across vast swaths of Japanese held territory. They compelled the nation to sign the treaty of the same year. Britain defeated German forces in the Battle of Alamein in North Africa, signaling a major reversal for Germany in the region, and imposed in November Anglo-American forces, taking advantage of Germany's major defeat, launched amphibious landings in North Africa. Under relentless Allied offensive, they quickly occupied coastal areas of North Africa. On March 17, 1943, Anglo-American forces launched the Tunisia stopgap measure. This battle lasted 2 months. Due to superior Allied weaponry, equipment, and numerical advantage, the Axis forces were completely defeated. Over 230,000 Italian and German soldiers became prisoners of war. This marked the utter collapse of the Axis powers on the North African front. Soon after, after German and Italian forces began a hasty retreat from North Africa. Immediately after, the Allies decided to launch an amphibious invasion of mainland Italy through the Mediterranean
Germany's economy
Sea.
lay in utter
On July 9,
Anglo-American
American forces carried out a large-scale landing on Sicily, successfully capturing the island. This landing not only defeated the German and Italian forces, but also forced Italy to declare its surrender. On June 5, General Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied forces, had amassed 2 million troops in Britain. At the same time, the German Meteorological Office predicted that the weather in the English Channel would be exceptionally bad for the next few days,
every German
completely
citizen would own a
unsuitable
car
for an Allied
for the
landing.
days of 500,000.
Therefore, Rommel left the front lines to celebrate his wife's birthday in
that he would
Germany.
ultimately shrug
This
the
information was
humiliating
quickly
treaty
intercepted
of
by
Versailles.
US intelligence.
His fervent
On
rhetoric
June 6,
resonated
millions of
deeply in
Allied
support
troops
of
began the
Nazi
landings in
Party
Normandy.
surge day by day.
Most German forces,
By
being somewhat
1932,
complacent,
the Nazis
caught by
had
surprise,
ascended to become
had not
Germany's
established
largest
effective
political
defences,
party, and
and were
Hitler,
consequently
securing an
routed.
impressive
This allowed
3
the Allies
million
to quickly
votes,
occupy
appointed
large
Chancellor.
areas of Normandy.
Driven by an
Continuous
ambition
troop
for swift
reinforcements from
national
Anglo-American
development,
forces,
Hitler aggressively
after 2 months of
championed
fierce
heavy
fighting,
industry
German
and
Normandy
military
completely fell.
Yet,
Subsequently,
the
Allied
shackles
forces
of the
swept
Treaty of
triumphantly
Versailles
towards Paris.
enforced by Britain and
By
France
November,
severely
Anglo-American
curtailed
forces
Germany's
completely
military
occupied
might. Its
France.
army was captured
On December
100,000
16,
men.
1944, in a
Its
desperate
navy
bid to turn the tide on the Western
and any
Front,
form of
Hitler
air
gambled
force,
to see
including
Germany's
naval
last reserve
aviation
elite
and
troops
military
launched his
aircraft
final,
outright
desperate
forbidden.
counteroffensive
At this
against the
impasse,
Allied
an
forces.
unexpected lifeline
Under the
emerged
German
from the
blitzkrieg
United
offensive,
States.
Allied forces were initially
Concerned that
caught
British
off guard
French
and forced to
dominance in
retreat.
Europe might undermine
Seeing
its
this,
own global
the Allies began to mass
US
large
extended
numbers
a
of troops on the
substantial
Western Front to support the
US
powerful
dollars
German
loans to
offensive.
Germany,
Both sides
attempting
entered a
to
brutal
foster a
stalemate.
counterbalance.
Due to severe shortages of German
Bolstered by
weapons
this
and
formidable
equipment,
American
Germany
aid,
gradually found
Germany
itself at
embarked on a
disadvantage.
clandestine
By January
military
26,
expansion.
1945, under the
Before
powerful
openly
Allied
asserting
firepower,
its strength,
German
Nazi
forces were
Germany
once
under
again
Hitler
pushed back to their
masterfully
original
crafted
position.
various pretexts
Clearly,
to
Hitler's
mask
gamble
its
had utterly
burgeoning
failed.
military
Turning the
development.
Pacific theater of February
Under the guise of
1945, the Battle of
manufacturing
Iwo
civilian
Jima
aircraft
erupted.
and tractors,
20,000
thousands of
Japanese
planes,
troops exacted a
tanks,
heavy toll on
armored
one of
vehicles,
10,000 US
and
lines,
artillery pieces
engaging in
were
some of the
secretly
war's most
churned
brutal
out.
close
To
quarters
circumvent
combat.
the ban on an air force, aviation
After a month of
clubs were
fierce
openly
fighting, the United
established.
States finally
When the
secured
army was
Iwo Jima.
restricted to 100,
On March 10, the US
Hitler
successfully
ingeniously
dispatched
swelled the
hundreds of
ranks of the
bombers to
German
carry out
police to
Operation
800,000.
Meeting House.
These seemingly illogical
launching
maneuvers
devastating
deftly
incendiary raids on
sidestepped
Tokyo,
Versailles
Japan.
restrictions,
According to statistics,
propelling
approximately
Germany's military
100,000
strength
Japanese
to rapid
casualties
growth.
resulted, and another
Hitler was
800,000
convinced that only
civilians were
through
left
formidable
homeless.
military
On April
power
1,
could
the
Germany
Battle of
Chamonix had the
Okinawa
oppressive
erupted,
chains
which was the largest
imposed by
island-hopping
Britain
battle in
and
history.
France.
Total of 400,000
Consequently,
troops from
spared
both
no
sides
expense.
participated.
Funneling the nation's
After several
entire
months of fierce
resources
fighting, the
into
United
military
States
industrial
ultimately
development.
achieved victory at the
Military
cost of 70,000
expenditure
casualties, while all
1938
100,000
army had
Japanese
swelled
troops on
to
the island
1
were
million
killed.
personnel.
Meanwhile,
Military spending
Japan's
continued
second
to
fleet launched
staggering
suicidal
50%
kamikaze
of
attacks
national
against the US military.
unparalleled
However, this
proportion
news was
globally.
quickly intercepted by
At this
US
juncture,
intelligence.
Hitler's ambition for
Despite
foreign
attacks from
expansion
kamikaze
became
pilots, the
irrepressible.
US Fifth
March
Fleet, 1938, saw Hitler annex the Japanese battleship return with 9 other warships. On May 8, 1945, the Soviet Red Army completely occupied Berlin, Germany marking the definitive end of the European theatre of World War II.
With Austria's
At this point,
considerable
only
oil
fascist
reserves,
Japan
Nazi
remained
Germany's
stubbornly
national
resisting,
strength
but
surged
their days were
further.
numbered.
On
On July
March
26,
15,
1945,
leaders of
the
Britain,
US,
Czechoslovakia,
the Soviet
this act
Union,
finally
and
roused
Boston
Britain
Conference
and France,
demanded Japan's
issued a
unconditional
stern
surrender,
warning of
warning that
German
otherwise
aggression against
Japan
European
faced prompt
nations
and utter
would result in
destruction.
a declaration
However,
of
this
war.
warning was swiftly rejected
Yet
by
Hitler,
Japan.
utterly
The
consumed by
United States then
rationality,
decided to unleash
dismissed
their
their
formight.
threats, convinced that
On
Britain
August
and
6, they
France
dropped
were
an
too
atomic
timid
bomb
to
on
engage
Hiroshima,
Germany
Japan.
in
3
direct
days later, on
conflict.
August 9, the US
Shortly
dropped another
thereafter,
atomic bomb
his
on
gaze
Nagasaki.
fixed on Poland as the
These
next
two
target
atomic
for
bombs
invasion.
caused an estimated
On August
300,000
23,
Japanese casualties.
1939, Germany
On
and the
August
Soviet
15,
Union
1945,
put
Japan announced its
Ribbentrop
unconditional
non-aggression
surrender.
pact.
With this,
This
World War
agreement
II
between
officially
two
came to an end.
non-contiguous
In
nations
1939 to
delineated their
1945,
shared
61
border
countries and
through
nearly 2
Polish
billion people were
territory,
drawn
an
into the war,
unambiguous
resulting in over
blueprint
90
for
million
partition
casualties.
Poland.
The stage
It
shaped the
now
world's
set the
structure for the next
imminent
50
eruption of
years and
war.
profoundly
Pre-dawn
altered
hours of
human
September
history.
1